The cold of the metal barrel inches from my face still haunts me even now. Not the cold of an October afternoon in Illinois, but the deadly, tangible cold of a Glock pointed directly between my eyes. His breath smelled of stale coffee and pure hatred. "I said go away," he growled, his voice hoarse. "This is no place for the likes of you. Lost, girl?" I stood on my lawn, the keys to my new house still warm in my coat pocket. A 2-story cream house with a white picket fence surrounding a small front yard, the suburban dream I had worked hard for a decade. Now, that dream was being tarnished by the barrel of a gun from a man in a Chesterfield police uniform. His name was Officer Frank Miller, and he was my neighbor. Everything inside me screamed to run, to scream, to do anything to get out of this situation. But years in courtrooms, facing people worse than this, even if not at gunpoint, had taught me one thing: keep a cool head. "This is my house, officer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest that threatened to burst. "I just moved in today." Miller's pale blue eyes narrowed, scanning me from head to toe, contempt evident on his red face. "Your house? You've got to be kidding me. How could someone like you afford a house in Oakwood Hills?" He sneered, an annoyed sound. "Cleaning for the new landlord, huh? Then mind your own business and stop loitering." The insult was like a slap. "Your kind." I knew exactly what he meant. My brown skin, my curly hair. Here in Oakwood Hills, with its perfectly manicured lawns and expensive SUVs parked in driveways, I was clearly an outsider. "I don't clean for anyone," I replied, my voice firmer. "I repeat, this is my house. I have the papers to prove it. Now please put down your guns and get off my land." That was when his anger exploded. "You dare raise your voice at me?" He pressed the barrel of the gun closer. I could feel its invisible pressure. "Who do you think you are? I'm a cop. I have every right to ask what the hell you're doing here. Now get out before I give you a legitimate reason to be afraid." A racial slur burst from his mouth, vicious and vile. The moment lasted an eternity. The wind rustling through the old oaks seemed to stop. The traffic on the main road in the distance died away. All that was left was Miller's ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I looked him straight in the eye, refusing to show weakness, even though inside I was breaking into a million pieces. Then, suddenly, there was the sound of a delivery truck turning the corner. Miller jumped, glanced in that direction. He hesitated for a moment, the ferocity in his eyes wavering. Finally, he lowered the gun, but did not holster it. "Watch out," he hissed, jabbing a finger at me. "I'll keep an eye on you. You'll regret coming here." Then he turned and walked quickly to the patrol car parked at the side of the road, the engine still running. He got in and drove away, leaving me standing on my lawn, shaking uncontrollably. I'm Imani Williams, 38 years old, Chesterfield County District Attorney, and I was just threatened at gunpoint by a fellow city police officer, a future neighbor, simply because I was a black woman who dared to move into his neighborhood. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what I did. All he saw was the color of my skin. And he just made the biggest mistake of his life. After Miller was gone, it took me a few seconds to collect myself. My legs felt like they were about to collapse. I stumbled into the house, slamming the door and locking it several times. I leaned against the sturdy wood and tried to take deep breaths. The empty house echoed with my gasps. The smell of fresh paint and fresh wood, which should have felt like a new beginning, was suffocating. The sense of security and joy of a new home had evaporated like a soap bubble. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where gunfire was sometimes the soundtrack to life. I worked hard to get an education, go to law school, and become a prosecutor to fight the injustices I witnessed. I prosecuted robbers, drug dealers, and murderers. I believe in the legal system, even though it is imperfect. I believe in justice. I was promoted to district attorney 6 months ago. With the new salary, I decided to leave my noisy apartment in the heart of Chesterfield for a quieter, safer place. Oakwood Hills, with its tree-lined streets and reputation for good schools, seemed like the perfect choice. I had to compete hard to buy this house, outbidding many others. It was the result of sweat, tears, and sleepless nights. It was a symbol of how far I had come. But within hours of officially moving in, I was confronted with the harsh reality. Racism doesn't just exist in the slums or in the cases I work on. It exists right here in this safe suburb, and it carries a gun and a police badge. The irony is bitter. I, a law enforcement officer, was victimized by a fellow member of the system, someone who is supposed to protect all citizens, regardless of skin color. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, my hands still shaking. What should I do? Call 911? Report a police officer to his own department? I knew all too well where that would lead. My word against the word of a veteran white officer in an all-white neighborhood. Who would believe me? They would say I was being overly sensitive, misreading the situation, or worse, they would believe some story Miller would surely concoct to defend himself. I can't act on emotion. I'm a prosecutor. I need to think like a prosecutor. I need evidence. I need a strategy. A few weeks earlier, things had been different. The joy of finding 14 Oak Avenue in Oakwood Hills had almost made me giddy. The realtor, a middle-aged white woman named Carol, had lavished praise on the neighborhood. "It's quiet, Imani," she said. "Friendly neighbors, great schools, you'll love it." I smiled, hoping she was right. The day I signed the purchase agreement, I drove around the neighborhood a few times. Big, well-kept houses, lush lawns. I saw a few neighbors gardening or walking their dogs. They nodded politely but hesitantly to me. I told myself that they just needed time to get used to a new face, a black face in their community. I was used to having to work twice as hard to be accepted. Moving day went smoothly. The movers worked efficiently. I busied myself directing them to place their belongings, trying to figure out my new life in the space. That afternoon, after the movers had left, I was standing on the porch, enjoying the warm, late autumn sunshine, when I saw a Chesterfield police cruiser drive by. I recognized Frank Miller behind the wheel. He stared at me, his eyes cold and unfriendly. I just nodded, a polite response. He didn't respond, just kept driving. At the time, I thought it was just the usual police alertness when seeing a stranger in the area, or maybe curiosity. I had no idea that the look in his eyes contained an explosion of hatred. My work at the Chesterfield County Prosecutor's Office is stressful, but also fulfilling. I specialize in violent crimes. Most recently, I successfully convicted a gang leader of first-degree murder. It was a complex case that took months, requiring meticulousness and tenacity. I take pride in my work, in helping to bring justice to victims and their families. I am used to facing threats from defendants or their families, but to be threatened by a police officer right in front of my house because of the color of my skin, that is a whole other level, a betrayal of the system I serve. Back to that horrible moment, right after Miller drove away. I sat on the cold kitchen floor, trying to piece together the scattered pieces of the event in my mind. I needed to write everything down, every detail, before my memory became clouded by emotion. I grabbed a notebook and pen. Time, approximately 3:45 p.m., Friday, October 15th. Location, front lawn of 14 Oak Avenue, Oakwood Hills, Chesterfield. Subject, Officer Frank Miller, Chesterfield Police, badge number 714. I saw him as he turned away. Behavior, unwarranted approach, racial slur, pulled out a department-issued Glock 19, pointed it directly at my face, verbal threats. "Get out before I give you a good reason to be afraid. I'll keep an eye on you. You'll regret it." Apparent reason? My skin color. Potential witness. The driver of a brown delivery truck who turned the corner toward the end of the confrontation. I wrote down every word Miller said that I could remember, trying to keep it as verbatim as possible. Recorded my own reactions, the struggle to stay calm, the fear, the assertion of ownership of the house. Recorded the drawing of the gun, the way he held it, the look in his eyes. I remembered the sound of the delivery truck. That might be a ray of hope. But how to find the driver? And did he or she see enough to testify? Would they dare testify against a police officer? Then I thought about security cameras. I didn't have any. I just moved in. But what about the neighbors? Here in Oakwood Hills, many of the houses must have security systems. I needed to check, but I had to do it discreetly. I didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention, especially from Miller, who lived only 3 doors down. I stood up and walked to the window to look outside. The street was quiet again. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky a rosy orange, a false peace. I felt like an intruder in my own home. The first call I made wasn't to 911. I called David Chen, a close colleague and deputy district attorney. David was straightforward, fair, and I trusted him. "David," I began, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm in a little trouble." I told him the whole story, from beginning to end, leaving out every detail, including the insults. David listened silently on the other end of the line. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Imani," he said finally, his voice taking on a seriousness I had rarely heard from him. "Are you sure it was Miller?" "Frank Miller?" 100% sure. I saw his face, heard his voice, saw his badge number. He lives 3 houses west of me. "Holy shit," David sighed. "Miller, that guy has a reputation for being tough, a little rough, but pointing a gun at people for no reason, and he's a prosecutor. This is serious, Imani. Very serious." "I know," I replied. "That's why I called you before I did anything else. I can't report this through the normal channels at the local police station. They'll protect their people." "You're right," David agreed. "We need to handle this carefully. Are you hurt?" "No, just shocked and angry." "Okay. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't try to approach Miller or the neighbors. Stay inside and lock your doors. Tomorrow morning, Saturday, we'll meet with Attorney General Thompson in his office. I'll make arrangements. We'll report this to the highest levels and request an internal affairs investigation, but we need to make sure it's closely monitored by the DA's office." Hearing David's clear plan of action made me feel a little more confident. At least I wasn't alone in this. "Thank you, David." "It's nothing, Imani. Stay safe. I'll call back soon." I hung up the phone and looked around the empty house. I barely slept that night. Every little noise outside startled me. The darkness outside the window seemed threatening. The image of Miller's gun barrel kept playing over and over in my mind. But alongside the fear, another feeling began to form. Steely determination. He had picked the wrong guy to mess with. He didn't know that he had just turned his gun on a prosecutor, someone who knew the system and would stop at nothing to see justice done. On Saturday morning, I met David at the Chesterfield County Prosecutor's office. The imposing red brick building, which usually gave me a sense of order and justice, seemed different today. David waited for me in the lobby, his expression serious. "Prosecutor Thompson is waiting for us," he said quietly. He was shocked when he heard the summary of the case. We took the elevator to the top floor, where the office of the district attorney, Mr. Arthur Thompson, was located. Mr. Thompson was a white man in his 60s with short gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. He had been in the field for more than 30 years. His office was spacious, overlooking the city square. He rose from his desk as we entered, shaking my hand formally. "Williams," he said, his voice low and serious. "David has given me a rough idea of what happened. Please sit down. Tell me the whole story, from beginning to end." I sat down, took a deep breath, and began my recounting. I presented the events clearly and coherently, as I would present a case in court. I described Miller's actions, quoted his words, and emphasized the fact that he pulled out a gun and pointed it at me for no reason other than the color of my skin. I also mentioned the potential witness, the delivery truck driver, and the possibility of a neighbor's security camera. Mr. Thompson listened attentively without interrupting, his sharp blue eyes fixed on me. When I had finished, he rested his hands on the table and was silent for a moment. "This is unacceptable," he said finally, his voice filled with indignation. "This behavior is an insult to the police badge and a blatant attack on a citizen. Worse yet, a member of this very office. We will not tolerate this." He turned to David. David, contact the Chief of Internal Affairs, Chief Detective Peterson, immediately. Request a full and immediate investigation of Officer Frank Miller in connection with this incident. Emphasize that the District Attorney's Office will closely monitor this investigation. I want daily updates." Then he turned back to me. "Ms. Williams, Imani, I'm sorry you've had to go through this. The important thing now is to ensure your safety and to conduct the investigation properly. From now on, you will temporarily not handle any cases involving the Chesterfield Police Department to avoid conflicts of interest. However, you will be kept fully informed of the progress of your own investigation. We will do everything in our power to ensure that justice is served." The strong and decisive support from the Attorney General has lightened the burden on my shoulders. I know this is just the beginning of a long battle, but I no longer feel alone. The IA investigation began immediately. 2 IA detectives, a white man named Riley and an African American named Jackson, came to see me in David's office to take my formal statement. I recounted the incident again, in more detail, providing the notes I had written the night before. They recorded the entire interview. They were professional and objective, but I could sense the underlying tension that came with investigating a fellow officer. "We'll talk to Officer Miller," Detective Riley said. "We'll also check the GPS data on his patrol car to confirm the location and time, and we'll try to locate the delivery truck as well as search the security cameras in the area as you suggested." The next few days were a tense wait. I tried to work through old files, but my mind was always on the investigation. David kept me updated. IA interviewed Miller. Unsurprisingly, he denied everything. He admitted to talking to me, but he told me a completely different story. He said he saw me acting suspicious around a newly moved house, and that he was just conducting a routine check. He denied pulling a gun or using racial slurs. He said I had overreacted and been hostile to the police. It was a blatant lie, my word against his. Without other evidence, I knew the case would likely go to waste, ending in an insufficient evidence conclusion from the IA. But then came a breakthrough. Detective Jackson called David. They found it. A security camera mounted on the garage of the Hendersons, who lived 2 doors down the street from me. The camera was pointed diagonally out onto the street and happened to capture much of the confrontation. David and I watched the video in a closed-circuit conference room at the IA office. The quality wasn't perfect, marred by the distance and the fading light of the afternoon, but it was clear enough. There was no sound, but the image spoke for itself. It showed Miller getting out of his patrol car and advancing toward me in an aggressive manner. It showed me standing still on the grass. And most importantly, it showed Miller pulling a black handgun from its holster, pointing it at me for several long seconds before lowering it as the delivery truck appeared in the corner of the screen. My heart pounded as I watched that moment on the screen. It was undeniable evidence. Miller's lie had been exposed. The Henderson family was initially hesitant, Detective Jackson explained. They were afraid of trouble, afraid of retaliation from the police, but we convinced them that providing this evidence was the right thing to do. With this video evidence, along with my detailed testimony and GPS data confirming that Miller's vehicle was stopped in front of my house at that exact moment, the case moved into a new phase. The IA completed its investigative report, concluding that Miller had seriously violated the department's use of force policy, committed official misconduct, and possibly committed a criminal offense. Attorney General Thompson, after reviewing the report and video, made his decision. "We will prosecute," he said in the meeting with David and me. "This office will file criminal charges against Frank Miller for second-degree aggravated assault, menacing, and abuse of power. We will also consider adding a hate crime element based on the racial slurs you heard, Imani." The decision sent shockwaves through the Chesterfield Police Department and the city. It was rare for a police officer to be prosecuted by the district attorney's office. Frank Miller was immediately suspended without pay. But the fight was just beginning. I knew that Miller and the police union would not give up easily. In the days that followed, I began to feel the pressure. Patrol cars seemed to appear more frequently on my street, driving very slowly. Sometimes I caught cold stares from other officers as I walked to court. There were whispers behind my back in the hallways. It was subtle harassment, hard to prove, but enough to make me feel uneasy. But instead of scaring me, these actions only strengthened my resolve. They showed me that I had touched a sensitive nerve, that the system was trying to protect a wrongdoer. I would not back down. I had faced Miller's gun. I could certainly face this kind of intimidation. I had turned the tables. From a helpless victim, I had become the one who held the key to holding him accountable. Preparations for the trial took several months. The DA assigned another senior prosecutor, Sarah Jenkins, to handle my case to ensure absolute objectivity. I worked closely with Sarah, providing every detail, reviewing my testimony multiple times, and preparing for the difficult questions I would face on cross-examination. Miller's attorney, a veteran of the police defense, tried every tactic of delay and discredit. They filed a motion to dismiss the case for lack of evidence, arguing that the video was unclear and had no sound. They requested my work records, trying to find anything they could use against me, suggesting that I had a bias against the police because of my profession. All their efforts were rejected by the judge. The trial of Officer Frank Miller began on a cold April morning. Courtroom 3 of the Chesterfield County Courthouse was packed. Local media was in attendance. I could feel the tension in the air. In the front row were David, Attorney Thompson, and a few of my colleagues who had come to support me. On the other side, Miller sat next to his attorney, his face tense but defiant. Police union members and several plainclothes officers sat behind him. When I was called to the witness stand, my heart beat faster. I walked past Miller, avoiding eye contact. I sat down in my chair, took a deep breath, and swore to tell the truth. Sarah Jenkins led my direct questioning. I recounted the entire incident calmly, clearly, and in detail, from the moment I was on my lawn until Miller left. I described his demeanor, his words, his actions. I recounted the racial slurs he used. I described the fear I felt as the barrel of the gun was pointed at my face. "Ms. Williams," Sarah asked, "at the time Officer Miller pointed his gun at you, did you do anything to threaten him? Did you have a weapon? Did you move toward him?" "No," I replied firmly. "I was just standing there on my lawn. I had no weapon. I did nothing to provoke or threaten him." "So what do you think was the only reason Officer Miller treated you like that and pointed a gun at you?" "It's the color of my skin," I said, my voice firm. "Because I'm a black woman in a neighborhood he thinks I don't belong in." The cross-examination by Miller's attorney, Mr. Henderson, was as tense as could be expected. He tried to pick at every little detail, tried to confuse me, tried to make me seem overly sensitive or hostile toward the police. "Miss Williams, you are a prosecutor, correct?" he asked. "Your job is to prosecute criminals, including police officers?" "My job is to prosecute anyone who breaks the law based on evidence," I replied. "So do you have a bias against police officers?" I respect police officers who do the right thing and follow the law. I only have a problem with those who abuse their power and break the laws they are sworn to protect." He tried to downplay the seriousness of the incident. "Could it be that Officer Miller was just being cautious? Could it be that you misunderstood his intentions? Pointing a gun at an unarmed civilian without reason and using racial slurs is not careful checking," I said, looking directly at the jury. "It is intimidation, assault, and a blatant abuse of power." He also tried to question my memory of the racial slur. "Are you sure Officer Miller said those words? Under stress, could your memory be affected?" "I am 100% sure," I affirmed. "Those words are engraved in my mind." After the cross-examination, Sarah showed the Hendersons' security camera footage. The courtroom fell silent as the blurry but clear image was displayed on the big screen. The moment Miller pulled out a gun and pointed it at me seemed to take everyone's breath away. Even without sound, his actions spoke for themselves. The next witness was Detective Jackson from IA, who confirmed the authenticity of the video and presented the results of their investigation, including Miller's contradictory and fraudulent testimony. The Henderson family was also called to testify about the video. The defense called Miller to the witness stand. He repeated his fabricated story, trying to pass himself off as an off-duty vigilante, and portrayed me as the aggressor. But under sharp cross-examination by Sarah Jenkins, his lies were quickly exposed. She pointed out inconsistencies between his testimony and the video evidence. She cornered him on his racist remarks. Miller became confused, angry, and ultimately looked miserable. After closing arguments from both sides, the racially diverse jury of 7 men and 5 women retired to the deliberations room. The wait was long. Each minute felt like hours. I sat with David and Sarah in the waiting room, trying to stay calm. Finally, after nearly 4 hours, it was announced that the jury had reached a verdict. We returned to the courtroom. The air was thick with tension. Miller stood beside his lawyer, his face pale. The foreman of the jury, a middle-aged woman, rose to read the verdict. For the charge of aggravated assault in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant. She paused for a second. Guilty. A sigh of relief spread across our half of the courtroom. For the crime of threatening, we find the defendant guilty. For the crime of abuse of power, we find the defendant guilty. I closed my eyes, relief flooding me. Justice had begun to be served. Miller stood there, seemingly in disbelief. Sentencing was scheduled for a few weeks later. During that hearing, I chose to read a victim impact statement. Standing before the judge, before Miller, and before the community, I spoke about how his actions were more than a personal attack. Officer Miller's actions did more than point a gun at me, Imani Williams, I said, my voice shaking but firm. He pointed a gun at the community's trust in those entrusted to protect them. He pointed a gun at the basic principle that every citizen, regardless of skin color, deserves to be treated fairly and with respect under the law. His actions, rooted in deep-rooted racism, shattered my sense of safety on my own land, in the home I worked so hard to earn. It was a painful reminder that even if you achieve success, even if you are part of the legal system, the color of your skin can still make you a target. I spoke of the lingering fear, of the vigilance I was forced to maintain in my own neighborhood. I spoke of the betrayal I felt toward the system to which I had devoted my career. Frank Miller's sentence is not just a punishment for the actions of an individual, I concluded. It is a message that abuse of power and racism in law enforcement will not be tolerated. That those who wear the badge are held to a higher, not lower, level of responsibility under the law. That justice, however slow it may sometimes be, can and must be served. After hearing my testimony and the arguments from the prosecutor and defense attorneys, Judge Del Rio rendered his verdict. He called Miller's actions disgraceful and a betrayal of the public trust. He sentenced Frank Miller to 2 years in prison, which was within the range of the charges against him, taking into account the abuse of power and use of a weapon. 2 years. Maybe not as long as some people expected, but that's a real prison sentence for a police officer for misconduct in the line of duty, especially when there was no serious physical injury. That's a win. As Miller was handcuffed and led away, I felt no sense of triumph. There was only a heavy but relieved feeling. Justice had been served in a legal sense. Life after the conviction did not immediately return to normal, because normal had taken on a new meaning for me. Frank Miller was in prison. He had also been officially fired from the Chesterfield Police Department. His name had become a warning about the consequences of racism and the abuse of power. I continued to live in the house in Oakwood Hills. The decision to stay was a conscious one. I refused to let a man's hatred drive me from my dreams, from the space I had earned. At first there were curious looks, whispers from some neighbors, but others, including the Hendersons, came to quietly show their support, bring a pie, or simply say hello. Gradually, I began to feel like this was really my home. I installed a state-of-the-art security system, not out of fear of Miller, but to regain the sense of control and safety that had been violated. I returned to work at the district attorney's office with a new perspective. That painful personal experience, though I never intended it, gave me a deeper empathy for victims of crime, especially those from minority communities, who often face injustice and prejudice from the very system that is supposed to protect them. It reinforced my belief in the importance of the work I do, not just prosecuting criminals, but also fighting for fairness and accountability, even within the ranks of law enforcement itself. Sometimes, as I stand in the small garden in front of my house, breathing in the fresh morning air, I still recall the cold barrel of the gun and the hateful look in Miller's eyes. That scar will never completely disappear, but it no longer defines me. It is part of my story, a story about confronting injustice, about using your voice and position to demand justice, and about the resilience of the human spirit. I am Imani Williams. I am a prosecutor. I am a Black woman, and I won. Not just in the courtroom, but in the fight for my dignity and my peace. Justice was served, and I stand, stronger than before, ready for whatever lies ahead. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If you like it, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories, because tomorrow I will tell you other interesting stories for you.